I was just wondering how you're going to be, at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Are you prepared?
I'm prepared. I'm all right. I'm all right with it.
And how?
I'm all right with it, but like I said, remember, let them know that I know that the cops knew who I was. After Richard Mallory died, I left prints everywhere, and they covered it up and let me kill the rest of those guys to turn me into a serial killer. I know they did.
The night before her execution, Aileen Wuornos didn't fall apart. No tears, no begging, no panic, no sudden softness. And that leaves one chilling question. What does it mean when someone about to die doesn't look afraid at all? On execution morning, she moved like it was something she'd already accepted. Coffee, silence, and that hard stare that made the room feel colder. No last-minute breakdown, no desperate attempt to buy time. Just a calm that didn't feel normal. It felt final. And when it was time for her last words, she didn't offer remorse. She didn't apologize. She issued a warning. In this video, we break down Aileen Wuornos' final hours, her final statement, and the details most people miss when they talk about her case. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and settle in. Because this story is darker than most people realize. And if you love these kinds of true crime breakdowns, kindly subscribe for more. Before the headlines called her a monster. Before the courts labeled her a serial killer. Before America knew her face. There was a girl no one was protecting. Aileen Wuornos was born into instability, neglect, and violence from the very start. She didn't enter the world with safety waiting for her. She entered it already behind. Her parents separated almost immediately, and before she was old enough to understand what family meant, she was abandoned by her mother and left with her grandparents. What followed wasn't guidance. It wasn't care. It was survival. From a young age, Aileen lived in a home marked by abuse, alcoholism, and emotional cruelty. She wasn't taught how to feel safe. She was taught how to endure. The people who should have protected her became part of the damage, and the outside world offered no rescue. By her early teens, Aileen was already living on the edge of society. She dropped out of school, ran away from home, and began drifting from place to place. With no stability and no support, she learned quickly that survival meant doing whatever was necessary to get through the next day. This is where many people stop listening, because childhood hardship doesn't excuse future violence. But it does explain how someone learns the world is hostile long before they learn it can be fair. As a teenager, Aileen lived on the streets, hitchhiking, trading sex for food, shelter, or protection. Trust wasn't something she gave easily. It was something she couldn't afford. Every interaction was a calculation. Every stranger a possible threat. Over time, something hardened. The constant fear, the constant exploitation, the constant sense that life was happening to her, never for her. This wasn't the making of a criminal yet. It was the making of someone who believed the world was already at war with her. And when a person grows up believing survival is combat, it changes how they see danger, power, and control. Long before the killings, long before death row, long before the execution chamber, the foundation was already set. By the time Aileen Wuornos reached adulthood, stability was no longer something she expected from life. She moved constantly, from state to state, from one temporary place to another. Hitchhiking became routine, not adventure. The road wasn't freedom, it was necessity. Every ride was a gamble, every night uncertain, every interaction shaped by power and vulnerability. For Aileen, survival meant reading people fast, who was safe, who wasn't, who might help, and who might hurt her. She supported herself through sex work, not as a choice built on opportunity, but as a last resort in a world that had offered her very few. It placed her in constant danger. Many encounters were marked by violence, intimidation, and fear. And over time, those experiences reshaped how she saw men, authority, and threat. This is where anger began to take root. Not loud, explosive anger at first, but a simmering resentment built from years of exploitation and abuse. Each encounter reinforced the belief that the world took from her without consequence. That strength belonged to whoever could seize it. She tried briefly to find something resembling normal life. At one point, Aileen married an older man and attempted to settle down. But the stability didn't last. The relationship fell apart, and she was soon back on the road, back in survival mode. With each passing year, her worldview narrowed. Trust felt dangerous. Dependence felt like weakness. Control felt like safety. By the late 1980s, Aileen was no longer just reacting to danger. She was anticipating it, expecting it, preparing for it. She began carrying a weapon, convinced that violence was not just possible, but inevitable. That belief would soon collide with reality in the most irreversible way. Because when someone lives long enough in survival mode, the line between defense and aggression starts to blur. And when fear becomes permanent, it doesn't take much for it to turn lethal. The road had given her no peace, only momentum. And momentum without direction leads to destruction. The first killing didn't happen in a courtroom. It didn't happen in a headline. It happened on a dark stretch of road where no one else was watching. In late 1989, Aileen Wuornos encountered a man who would become the first of 7 victims. What exactly happened in that moment would later be debated endlessly by lawyers, psychologists, journalists, and the public. Wuornos claimed she acted in self-defense, saying she was attacked. Prosecutors argued it was murder, carried out during robbery. What mattered most was this: a line had been crossed. After that first killing, something changed. Not immediately on the surface, but internally. Wuornos didn't turn herself in. She didn't seek help. Instead, she kept moving, drifting across Florida, carrying both the memory of what she'd done and the belief that violence was now part of survival. Over the next year, 6 more men were killed. Each time, Wuornos claimed fear. Each time, prosecutors pointed to patterns. Each time, the distance between her version of reality and everyone else's grew wider. To Wuornos, she was defending herself in a world that had always been hostile. To investigators, the evidence told a different story, one of escalating violence and control. This is where the case becomes deeply uncomfortable, because 2 things can be true at once. Aileen Wuornos experienced real trauma and abuse, and innocent people lost their lives. By the time authorities connected the killings, Florida was no longer looking for a suspect. They were looking for a serial killer. And when Wuornos was finally arrested in 1991, the image of her that reached the public was stark and unforgiving. She didn't fit the stereotypes people were used to. She didn't look calculated or polished. She looked angry, defiant, unstable. And that made the story even more explosive. Because America wasn't just confronting a series of murders. It was confronting the idea that a woman, shaped by neglect and violence, could become one of the most notorious killers in its history. The road that once represented survival had now become a trail of death, and there was no turning back. By the time police closed in on Aileen Wuornos, the road had finally run out. In January 1991, she was arrested in Florida after investigators connected her to a string of murders that had terrified the state. The break in the case didn't come from a dramatic chase or a sudden mistake. It came from people close to her, from evidence that slowly tightened until there was nowhere left to go. When officers took her into custody, Wuornos didn't collapse. She didn't cry. She didn't act surprised. Instead, she reacted with anger. During questioning, her emotions swung between defiance and paranoia. At times, she lashed out at investigators, accusing them of framing her. At other moments, she spoke openly, almost casually, about the killings. The tone wasn't remorseful. It was confrontational, as if she believed the world was finally confirming what she had always felt, that it was against her. Eventually, she confessed, not in a quiet, reflective way, but in a way that felt explosive and unstable. She admitted to killing the men, but insisted it was self-defense, repeating that she had been attacked and feared for her life. Investigators, however, pointed to evidence that contradicted her claims, including patterns in how the crimes unfolded. This clash between her perception and the evidence became the core of the case. To prosecutors, Wuornos was a serial killer motivated by robbery and control. To Wuornos, she was a survivor who had finally fought back. The confession didn't bring clarity. It deepened the divide. As the story broke into national headlines, public reaction was immediate and intense. The idea of a female serial killer shattered expectations. Media coverage fixated on her appearance, her anger, and her background, often stripping the story of nuance. But behind the spectacle, something else was becoming clear. Wuornos wasn't just facing criminal charges. She was facing a system that would now try to make sense of a life lived almost entirely in chaos. And as the case moved toward trial, the question was no longer just what did she do? It was who was Aileen Wuornos when she did it, and did that matter? By the time Aileen Wuornos entered the courtroom, the verdict in the public's mind was already written. The trial wasn't just about evidence, it was about image. Wuornos didn't look like the kind of defendant people expected sympathy for. She was confrontational, unpredictable, and openly hostile toward the system judging her. Cameras captured every outburst, every glare, every angry sentence, and those moments quickly overshadowed everything else. Prosecutors presented Wuornos as a calculated serial killer, arguing that she murdered her victims during robberies and then used self-defense as a cover story. They pointed to physical evidence, timelines, and inconsistencies in her accounts. To them, this wasn't fear, it was intent. The defense told a different story. They spoke about a lifetime of abuse, homelessness, and exploitation. About a woman who had lived for years in constant danger and had learned to expect violence from strangers. They argued that Wuornos's actions came from terror, not malice, and that her mental state made her incapable of processing events the way most people do. But nuance struggled to survive in that courtroom. Wuornos herself didn't help her case. She clashed with her lawyers, dismissed psychiatric evaluations, and at times seemed more focused on proving she wasn't weak than on saving her own life. The jury watched a woman who appeared angry at the world, and anger is rarely persuasive. When the guilty verdict was delivered, it felt inevitable. Wuornos was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. As the judge read the sentence, there was no visible shock, no tears, no collapse, just the same hardened expression that had followed her throughout the trial. Outside the courtroom, debate raged. Was she a cold-blooded killer, a traumatized survivor, or both? The trial had answered the legal question, but it left the human one wide open. And as Wuornos was led away to death row, the story was far from over. Death row is designed to do one thing: slow time down. For Aileen Wuornos, it became the longest chapter of her life. After sentencing, she was transferred to Florida State Prison, where her world shrank to concrete walls, locked doors, and routines that never changed. Days blended together. Lights came on and off at fixed hours. Meals arrived on schedule. Human contact became limited, controlled, and distant. At first, Wuornos continued to fight. She lashed out at guards, argued with attorneys, claimed conspiracies against her. Her behavior swung between rage and paranoia, reinforcing the image the public already believed, that she was volatile, unstable, and unreachable. But over time, something shifted. The anger didn't disappear, but it hardened into something colder. Wuornos began giving interviews, writing letters, and speaking openly about her case. She repeated the same themes again and again: that she had been wronged, that the system was corrupt, that she was being executed for defending herself. Mental health professionals evaluated her repeatedly. Diagnoses of severe personality disorders and paranoia followed. Some experts believed she was deeply mentally ill. Others argued she was manipulative and fully aware of her actions. Wuornos rejected most help. She dismissed therapy, distrusted doctors, refused to cooperate in ways that might humanize her to the court. And when appeals were filed on her behalf, she eventually did something that shocked even seasoned attorneys. She asked for them to stop. Wuornos waived her remaining appeals and requested that her execution move forward. She said she was tired of waiting, tired of fighting, tired of living in a world she believed had already decided her fate. To some, this looked like acceptance. To others, it looked like mental collapse. But the result was the same. The clock began moving again. And once it did, there was no turning it back. When Aileen Wuornos chose to stop fighting her execution, it stunned almost everyone involved. Death row inmates usually cling to appeals for years, sometimes decades. Even those who insist they're guilty often fight to stay alive. Wuornos did the opposite. She demanded the process end. She told the court she was ready to die. To her lawyers, this raised alarms. They argued she was mentally ill, paranoid, and incapable of making such a final decision rationally. To them, waiving appeals wasn't acceptance. It was surrender driven by a fractured mind. Wuornos rejected that idea completely. She accused her attorneys of betrayal. She claimed the justice system was corrupt. She said she was being tortured by the delay itself. In her words, staying alive on death row was worse than dying. This wasn't said quietly or tearfully. It was said with force. The court ordered additional mental evaluations to determine whether she was competent to make this choice. Doctors interviewed her repeatedly, testing whether she understood what execution meant and whether her decision was voluntary. Their conclusion was controversial but decisive. Aileen Wuornos was ruled competent. She understood what death was. She understood it was permanent, and she still wanted it. Once that ruling was made, the system did what it always does. It moved forward. An execution date was set. From that moment on, everything changed. The appeals stopped. The legal arguments ended. Time, which had slowed to a crawl for over a decade, suddenly felt fast. For Wuornos, the waiting was over, but the silence grew heavier. Because when someone chooses death, the question is no longer will it happen? It's what happens in the final hours before it does. The final 24 hours on death row are nothing like people imagine. There are no dramatic countdown clocks, no constant speeches, no chaos. Instead, everything becomes quiet, procedural, controlled, almost clinical. For Aileen Wuornos, the last day began early. Prison staff followed protocol, notifying her that this would be her final morning. There were no protests from her, no sudden requests for mercy. Witnesses later said she appeared calm, even impatient, as if she had already prepared herself long before the date arrived. She declined a traditional last meal. Instead, she asked for coffee, a small, ordinary request that stood in sharp contrast to the moment itself. She drank it slowly, in silence. Wuornos spent time alone in her cell, occasionally speaking with prison staff and a spiritual advisor. Conversations were brief. There were no emotional outbursts, no visible fear. The anger that once defined her seemed muted, not gone, but contained. When asked if she wanted to make phone calls or see anyone, she kept things minimal. She didn't reach out widely. She didn't seek reconciliation. Whatever closure she needed, she wasn't looking for it in other people. As the hours passed, preparations continued around her. Paperwork, security checks, witness coordination. Everything moved with rehearsed precision, the same way it had for every execution before hers. And that may have been the most unsettling part. This wasn't personal to the system, it was routine. As evening approached, Wuornos was informed it was time to prepare for transfer. She stood without resistance, walked without hesitation. According to those present, her posture was steady, her face unreadable. This was not the behavior of someone clinging to life. It was the behavior of someone who believed the outcome had been decided long ago. And as the door to her cell closed for the last time, one question lingered in the minds of everyone watching. Was this acceptance or exhaustion? As the moment approached, Aileen Wuornos was escorted into the execution chamber. There was no resistance, no hesitation, no visible fear. Witnesses later said she appeared focused, alert even, as if this was a moment she had prepared for long before it arrived. Prison officials followed protocol, securing her in place while final checks were completed. The room was quiet, controlled, and heavy with finality. Then she was asked if she had any last words. What she said stunned many of those watching. Wuornos did not apologize. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not mention her victims. Instead, she delivered a statement that reflected the same mindset she had carried for years, marked by paranoia, distrust, and detachment from shared reality. Her final words were, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus June 6th, like the movie Big Mothership and all. I'll be back." The room went silent. To some, the statement sounded defiant. To others, deeply disturbing. But to those who had followed the case closely, it was tragically consistent. Even in her final moments, Wuornos spoke as someone who believed the world had wronged her, and that death itself was not the end. At 9:47 a.m. on October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. She was 46 years old. The procedure was quiet and brief. Medical personnel confirmed her death. Officials completed the final documentation, and just like that, one of the most infamous chapters in true crime history closed, not with remorse but with unresolved questions that still haunt the case today. Aileen Wuornos' execution ended her life, but it did not end the argument surrounding her case. In the years since, her name has remained one of the most debated in true crime history, not just because of what she did, but because of what she represented. A female serial killer, a survivor of extreme abuse, a mentally unstable defendant who chose death over continued appeals. For some, Wuornos is remembered as a cold-blooded murderer who took 7 lives and showed no remorse. To them, the execution was justice finally carried out, long overdue. For others, her story is a failure of the system, a woman shaped by neglect, violence, and untreated mental illness, discarded by society long before she ever picked up a weapon. In that view, her crimes were horrific, but her execution was not a solution, only an ending. What makes her case so unsettling is that it refuses to fit into a single narrative. She was violent, she was traumatized, she was responsible, she was deeply unwell. All of those things can be true at the same time. Wuornos didn't die asking for forgiveness. She didn't die claiming clarity or peace. She died holding on to the same beliefs that defined her final years, beliefs that left the public divided and uneasy. And maybe that's the real legacy of her case. Not closure, not understanding, but discomfort. Because Aileen Wuornos forces us to confront questions we'd rather avoid. How much does trauma shape violence? Where does responsibility end and illness begin? And does execution answer those questions, or silence them? Her story ended in a prison chamber, but the debate she left behind is still very much alive.